Hey y'all, Dave here. Welcome to the third part in the discussion of Seven Types of Atheism. And once again, I show it, nobody can actually see it, but I'll pop up a little book cover image. In the previous videos in this series, we discussed the introduction and the chapter on New Atheism, and the last chapter was discussing secular humanism and other types of humanist endeavors. And in this one, we're going to be talking about science, or faith in science, and his take on some things that happen in the history of science. So, Rev, thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate it. How's things?
Doing good. Just crack-a-lacking right along here in Tennessee, I suppose.
Nice one. And what did you think of this chapter of the book?
Well, the title of it is actually A Strange Faith in Science. So, I've never been a big proponent of science for reasons that it's way too hard. But
I can relate.
yeah,
I did philosophy.
Yeah, so I've always anybody that is going to attack science and bring it down to the couple notches, I'm on board with that for sure.
It's getting a bit too big for its boots, really, isn't it?
That is it. It's had a good run, but yeah, it's time to let another person talk, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Going around thinking it's all hoity-toity just because he gets things right.
Yeah, exactly.
It was kind of an interesting chapter. It went in places that I wasn't quite expecting. I was expecting more of a sort of new atheism-based discussion where it's all based in scientism, but it went in a very different direction.
Yeah, I kind of thought initially it would be more about sort of the scientism where folks are trying to sort of use science to answer the questions that are generally reserved for religion or philosophy or whatever, and kind of make science into something it's not. And this was actually more about some of the types of science and kind of the history of science. One thing I do want to say about the book that I've really kind of enjoyed is a lot of the people that you hear their names thrown around a little bit, but don't have like a real strong background with who these people are. There's some pretty good biographical information that's not, super dense on guys like, Thomas Huxley, Darwin, Voltaire, Hume, and you get kind of just a little sort of glimpse of some of these people and their timeline, who they interacted with, and their place in all of this history. So there's beyond the arguments he's making, there's some definitely kind of good biographical, sketchy type stuff.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the time when you read biographical type stuff, it's usually trying to paint the person in as best a light as possible, whereas in this one, he talks about the flaws of the people.
Yeah, and
not in a bad way, just in a way that you don't normally hear them spoken about.
Yeah, it's good to get a little bit of background, and a person can always take it to the next level if they want, and read these other books or read about these other people, and a lot of the things that they talked about in this chapter and the people and the flaws with them were because they were racist and not something you're going to put in the bottom of a meme. By the way, this guy was a terrible racist. So you just get the quote, and a lot of that just gets kind of swept to the side.
Yeah, and it's he doesn't just talk about people in general, or very specific people being racist. He talks about how there was a a lot of racism behind the Enlightenment movement as well. Like, a lot of people look back at the Enlightenment movement as the triumph of rationality, but seem to forget some of the bad places that rationality took people.
Yeah, there was such a thing as scientific racism,
Yeah,
the problem is that it was intermixed with what they called rationalism. So it's not only bad just on its surface, but also comes with this, like, we got to this point using reason and logic. So now we're justified in believing this, and now we know we're smarter than these other people. But every sort of study, the people that came on top were European whites, the things that they believed were obviously incorrect today, and
yeah,
definitely biased. For all of
oh, yeah,
them to come up with those conclusions in like measuring skulls or bumps on skulls, stuff like that, or not taking into account the social or uh, environmental variables that different groups of people have, that
yeah.
you know it's like taking your why can't these people do this? Well, they don't have to, so that's why. It's not that they can't, it's just it's not necessary for them.
Well, it kind of touches on something like that when it talks about Hume and Hume's racism. One of Hume's arguments is that you can tell that the European is superior to the Negro because the Negro has not produced any great works of art or any great poetry or any great architecture, forgetting about the fact that, most of them had already been enslaved and oppressed and didn't have educations or places to actually do any of these things.
Yeah, or that they did, but I'm guessing
But
he
nobody
probably
saw it.
didn't go to the library to check out a book on poetry or literature. From he just, because he hadn't heard it, assumed that it wasn't there.
Yeah,
But
he was just basing it on the experiences of, like, the slaves that he was,
yeah,
he knew. Yeah.
yeah. It's kind of like when we're watching Shogun. I'm sure a lot of people are finishing up with that, and it's always funny when the Europeans kind of realize that, oh yeah, maybe there are greater empires than ours out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of glad that that's finished.
Yeah. The And then of course, and then it talks in between there, sort of and you hear like it went back and forth about evolution and Darwin. That Darwin was a racist and stuff like that, and it's not as simple as that, I don't think, but there's definitely needs to be, the whole process of our understanding of evolution needs to be understood, and where we at right now is probably not the final place we'll end up either.
Oh, no, no, definitely not. We'll continue on some trajectory, both physically and socially, I guess. And things will constantly change. People will probably look back on us in 100 years' time and go, "How could they be like that?
Yeah,
How could they be treating X group of people so badly?" And like we do now for 100 years ago.
yeah, exactly. And one of this guy named Thomas Huxley, who was I guess
Darwin's bulldog.
Darwin's bulldog. Yeah, uh, he wrote a lot of racial, made a lot of racial statements, and then his grandson, I guess it would be in the 30s, kind of backtracked all of that when the Nazis started doing stuff with it.
Yeah,
And then he was sort of like, okay, we don't need to be talking about this anymore.
yeah. Well, I think it was Huxley's grandson that was the one that talked about how are we sure that the black people evolved from apes and not the other way around or something like that. There was a
I think
comment
that
like
was
that.
uh, Kant.
Was it Kant?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
Kant that said that came up with that jump. Um, yeah, and the one thing that Huxley did say though is that if people think that we're going to evolve to a higher level, then it would have to be like manipulated and planned. It won't just happen on its own. The if you really believe that humans have evolved, which we should, then every person is a product of that evolution.
Yeah.
They use a quote where it's the thief and the philanthropist are both equally products of evolution.
Yeah.
So so the so where does the faith in all of this come in? Um, it's basically something where I think, again, and this kind of goes back to chapter 2, where people are looking to replace um, religious elements, and especially Christian, because that's where most people are heavily influenced by, whether they believe it or not, um, with something, give them something else. So one of the things, unlike a lot of religions that Christianity offers, is a better tomorrow, right? It's
Yeah.
you're struggling today. We hear you. It's going to suck. You're going to die, but there's better things down the road. Or your life, we're going to continually get better. God's going to improve your life. So you say you take away all of that, but then people are like, well, I kind of like this hope bit here, right? I kind of like the idea that my life has meaning, the things I do matter, and then I think there's a tendency to be like, well, okay, evolution then, so we will evolve better, we will live longer, we will live better lives, we will do these things, and I think that's where the replacement comes. And then you see a lot of back and forth about evolution, and probably neither side has got a real good grasp on what it's all about. It doesn't offer hope, and that's where you just got to say, if you need the hope bits, then you need to stay in church,
Yeah.
or something that is that way. But believing that things are going to evolve for generations ahead of us in a good way is not what evolution is about.
No, it's you would also almost have to insist that there was a guiding hand behind it too.
Yeah,
If you're going to say, well, each successive new generation is just going to get better and better and better, that would imply some sort of teleology or some sort of design where each generation is an improvement, and
yeah,
that can only be guaranteed by something like a designer or a guiding hand. And so that kind of matches up with, like you were saying, if you want that kind of thing, you're better off just going with the church,
sure,
finding a
yeah,
church you like. Yeah.
yeah, and if you need that for whatever reason, then, and I think that's who's to say, right? And living without hope better than understanding, in truth? I don't know. That's for each person to decide
That's,
on their own.
yeah, that's a personal choice. There's nothing that you could sort of argue in an epistemic way that, one ought to favor truth over hope. Um, you, you know, there's better arguments that could be made where, as long as that person isn't causing harm and they aren't believing things that are so false that it's harmful to them or others, then, who's to argue that they're doing it wrong by looking for hope instead?
Yeah, and or meaning. I think we're driven to find meaning, and if it gives value to our suffering, then there's value in that as well. And
Yeah.
and again, one of the main thrusts of this book is that our brains are designed, or with evolution, for survival, not for
Yeah.
truth necessarily. So thinking that we're these your Roomba's more designed for truth than we are.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Roombas will go right off the cliff because they don't care about survival. They just care about what's programmed and what they are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it. I was thinking as well, there's some other things like that, looking for meaning in suffering. You could kind of find it in evolution. You'd have to fill it in there. But maybe that's a part of with each successive generation, things will get better, people will get better. It's that sense of hope and giving meaning to the suffering. Well, people suffered from all these things in the past so that we could be as evolved as we are now, type of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and we're not here to see how that all will play out.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a safe, easy bet. And I know too that a lot of folks that watch this are kind of programmed to poop their pants if they hear faith and science in the same sentence.
Yeah.
And it's not there's we both understand that the scientific method, there's no faith in it, and there's no it's not for a person's beliefs, and I understand all that, but it's the faith that science will always do intrinsically things for good, or that science will be the answer to our long-term existence. Faith, because at the end of the day, just like religion, what we see as science is a package, it's a product.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of bad science out there, and it's easy to say, well, this isn't true science or that isn't true science, but it's still under that umbrella. It's a tool that humans use, and having a Christian like faith in science is just as problematic as having that same sort of faith in gods.
Yeah. I mean, I was in discussion with somebody in the comments about this. What you mentioned, having a bit of a meltdown because faith was used in terms of science.
Yeah, I think the technical term is they poop their pants.
They poop their pants. Yeah, I mean they do. They kind of shit the bed and
Yeah,
get all touchy, and it becomes impossible to speak to them because the language that they're using isn't about trying to understand what you said, um, but more like the power of Christ compels you during the scene in The Exorcist where they're trying to get rid of the evil spirit from in front
yeah,
of them. And that's what their language reminds you of. It's, I must get rid of the heretic in front of me who's using faith, and I can't listen to them in case I agree because faith is bad. And yeah. Um, and he's got kind of the same attitude of science will answer everything. Science has the answer. Science is designed for truth and only achieves truth, and that's a hell of a lot of faith
yeah,
in science and in like the knowledge that we have at the moment from science. Like you said, there's a lot of bad science out there, and we can't know which one is which as people out here not doing it.
yeah.
Um, so we just have to have this kind of faith that people will find it. People are doing their job in the scientific community and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it boils down to the people. Do you have
Yeah.
trust in those people? And um, I I also think too, there's with science, there's a bit of a back and forth of what science means. Sometimes for people, they'll use it as a series of methods. And then sometimes I get the impression that science to them is sort of like an omniscient um, uh, collection of knowledge,
Yeah.
that's out there, a series of truths. That's science. And
Yeah.
no, that's God, right? I mean, what's the difference? And you're just now calling that all-knowing systems of truths or method of truths or whatever science instead of God. And what this knowledge is, when we will discard a lot of it over the next few years, we will replace it. And people are constantly challenging it right now, and that's
Yeah.
part of the beautiful thing about it. But sort of pitting the two against each other, when I think they're almost more complementary than most people would care to
Yeah.
um, admit, because I've always kind of looked at it that religion is, and I don't mean any sort of God worshiping necessarily, but religion is for the meaning. The what am I doing here? Why am I here? And then the science is for like, how does this shit work?
Yeah.
So the two should not be used, when the other one should. But I think you need an element of both in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I use philosophy for that kind of thing
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah, yeah,
religion,
yeah.
but
Or
it's all the same kind of thing.
yeah, or your system of morals.
Yeah.
And how do you determine that this is the right thing to do? Those sorts of questions. Yeah, and I put that religion's not the right word to use, but just in the scope of this sort of thing, if you broaden it out to just be like things that you believe, but you can't necessarily say, look, I'm hardwired to this, or I believe this is an absolute truth, but this is my like checkbook of how I make these sorts of decisions.
Yeah.
Like why do I give my $20 to this guy instead of this guy, or do I split it? Those sorts of things, like
Yeah.
that like a sense of spirituality or whatever you want to call it. But um, you need to be able to embrace both. And the idea that, like, you'll hear it where they'll be like, atheists don't have beliefs. And yeah, you do. Just
Yeah.
sorry. The only atheists that don't have beliefs are rocks.
Or dead ones.
Yeah, or dead ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
If you have
so
no beliefs, you've taken your autoerotic asphyxiation a little too far.
that's right. That's right. And I don't think that is one of the chapters in this book, but who knows? We have
Sequel.
maybe the sequel. But yeah, and so you really need to push that away, those two things, and not see them as opposed, or one is all good and one is all bad.
Yeah.
Um, and I think they're more complementary than they are opposed. And certainly some people use the one to do the other and vice versa. And that's where you run into the problems, is using the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah. Um, I was thinking about it the other day or yesterday, during a discussion with that guy on the comment section. There are certain people who have so much faith in science that it becomes almost religious. Like they almost deify it to a point, like
Yeah.
you were saying. Where when you say faith in context of science, they get angry and they see it as like a blasphemy. But they also see it as like a means of divining truth and getting to, say, a divine mind. They
Right.
see it as a divine mind. But you could also include the idea that they also believe that if they do enough rituals to please science, they will get. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The experiments are the rituals, but then they also see religion as this holy bad thing. It's the cause of all the problems. Science hasn't caused any problems.
Yeah.
So they are very complementary in that sense too, depending on the person that you're talking to.
Yeah. And people are quick to say, all religion is bad. And you're like, no. And they're like, yeah, there's this one verse in the Bible, and that's religion.
Yeah.
And um that's, again, yeah, if you want to say this particular thought in this part, like eugenics is terrible, terrible science, right?
Yeah.
But you don't blame eugenics on science. You don't blame Hiroshima and Nagasaki on science. You say these were terrible, terrible um, uses of science, and but you don't say that that's science fault or religious fault. Some group of guys in the Bible went and killed another group of guys in the Bible. Those guys are assholes, not religion. But it's so quick to just be like religion is poisoned, and the again, and without it being about gods or theology, we still need to struggle with morality. We still need to struggle with grief, tragedies, good times. We need a way to do that, because again, our brains aren't meant for survival and living long and reproducing, and you ain't going to do that if you can't make decisions and deal with tragedies and stuff like that.
Yeah, or just fall into despair because you suddenly realize that nothing has any meaning.
Yeah, and then you become like Morrissey or something.
Yeah, and nobody wants to be like Morrissey.
No. Well, I think I can safely say evolution was like, enough of this.
That's why the planet is actually going into meltdown, because Morrissey was born.
Yeah. Then evolution was like, yeah, hold on, we gotta switch.
Go back.
Yeah.
Bring the dinosaurs to the forefront this time.
Yeah. Where are the B-52s when you need them? But no, yeah, and then also too, like I say, the idea that you'll hear these like definitions, like faith is defined as belief without evidence, which that's loaded, right? So that allows you to gatekeep evidence, but also it's just wrong, because first of all, it's really hard, generally speaking, to hold a belief without evidence.
Yeah. There is at least some evidence that prompts the actual cognitive processes in your minds.
Right. No, it might not be right. You may have drawn the wrong conclusion. There might be better evidence, but we just don't go around believing things that we don't have evidence for. And just even just someone mentioning that something exists. If we have no reason to doubt that, then okay, we believe that exists, and that my evidence was I was told that it was.
Yeah.
That's how our brains work. And I understand that now. Maybe a better definition is, faith is believing something that's hard to believe, maybe, perhaps, or goes against some of the evidence that you have. And part of Christianity is about that. It's like you're supposed to believe to be able to walk on water. When Peter was trying to walk on the water, and Jesus was like, yeah, what's up with that? And they did, or like in horror movies, it's always the faith, right? There's that first part where they put the crucifix up, and then the vampire's like, cackling, and then the guy's like, and then now, because of the faith that you have. So there is something to that. And believing past the evidence you know, I don't ever. I mean, they went to blowing up the Death Star, right? We know that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fact. That's in the history books right there.
Yeah. Well, it's in the future history books
Right.
because it's. Oh
No,
no,
I'm pretty
actually,
sure. No, because
yeah,
it was a
it's
long
a
time
long
ago,
time
right?
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So back in the uh, early 1300s or whenever all that shit went down.
Yeah, a long time ago, like the 60s.
Yeah, yeah. So the first part of the chapter, really showing uh, the anti-Semite and racism that was abound in the Enlightenment era, in science, the science fields, and a lot of your favorite philosophers probably um, not the best of guys,
Yeah.
and probably could have done a little said some nicer things, I think.
Yeah. And probably could have done well to not start the whole eugenics trend.
Yeah, that was a bad step, and I think there's a tendency to excuse folks, from especially like in America when they talk about, well, yeah, they were racist, they were slaveholders, but everybody was, so they're a product of their times, and I think I understand what people are saying. It's easier to be racist when everyone else is, but also they were racists,
Yeah.
and it means we need to sift out and say we don't need to put their ideas on the pedestal that we put them on.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, yeah, these guys did not have all the answers, very obviously, because I know, like in the founding fathers, there were predominantly racist and misogynistic and all of that, but not all of them. And the guys that weren't really stood out back then, I suppose. But again, it's maybe it's time to leave them in take what's good and separate, like you said, the art from the artist, but at the same time, maybe not push these people up that are uh, kind of being shitheads outside of the things you agree with them on.
Yeah. And and I think that's kind of a theme that goes on in the book. Or at least so far, in that there are things that produce great things, like, secular humanism can produce great things, but there is also faults within them, and we need to be honest about those faults and not overlook them and not allow our faith in the good things to ignore the bad things.
Yeah. Or be afraid to acknowledge it
Yeah.
and not talk past it if people question it because of that. And um yeah, it's there's always like I say, there's a balance that needs to be had, and either one unchecked is a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I kind of hope more atheists will actually read the book and read it with an open mind and an inquisitive mind and like an attempt to understand it rather than attempt to debunk the entire book.
Yeah, and if not, get some diapers handy, because faith and science happen in the same sentence on more than one occasion.
Quite a few said, yeah.
So get one of those big bundle packs from Costco, I suppose, and then enjoy your outrage.
Yeah. And the worst thing is the more outraged some of them get about what he's saying, the more they kind of prove some of the things that he's saying.
Yeah, yeah, it's evident. It's like, oh yeah, we were talking about this guy right here in chapter two,
Yeah.
and yeah, you see that. The next part then he does is then he talks a little bit of actual religions that sort of tried to be scientific, and
Yeah.
I'm all here for this. The first one was mesmerism by this guy named Franz Mesmer, and I remember hearing about him in church, but not a lot. And um, these are people that were trying to use, and then of course Christian Science, which I'm very very familiar with, kind of came a little bit after that, but you have to sort of understand that faith healing was a big thing back then, but it isn't what it is today, right? It wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, there were certainly scams, and certainly, the productions. You think faith healing, you think like Benny Hinn and that sort of thing. This was an honest attempt to use the power of the mind to heal yourself. And, back in the turn of the 20th century, medicine didn't have the best track record. People got like, we don't know. We don't know. They don't know about bacteria quite yet. They don't know about a lot of different things. So, these kind of filled in a lot of gaps. And I always say, Christian Science is neither Christian nor science, and I think 100% of Christians would agree with that, and I think 100% of scientists would agree with that. But it wasn't born out of any sort of like traveling medicine show, or like a quick ailment sort of thing. It was people taking what they perceived to be a scientific approach, sort of like Thomas Aquinas did with his Summa Theologica, right? Where it's a book of, let's organize this. Let's put all the questions out and let's put some structure into this. And that's kind of what these religions were trying to do. It wasn't, but it was like, let's take a different approach. God isn't answering our prayers. Maybe we're doing it wrong. And and this is where you get the sort of the Gnostic sort of element. And again, where that means it's not to know that God exists, but to know what God is and to understand how it works. So you basically, and this was again, for the most part, was well-to-do society folks were getting into this. It was a big booming thing at one point, and because it had sort of an intellectual, like you get to think on your own. You get to you're not just told. There's no sermons. There's no you try to discover this divine mind. Which was what you had said a while back, which like triggered me about that, because I certainly heard that in my life. And it's finding a healing power by trying to find that where God's sweet spot is, so to speak. So it's whenever I hear people say, well, Gnostic means, do you know that God exists? And it's like, no, it means, do you know the essence of God? Do you know what is it that works? And obviously a lot of people weren't getting their prayers answered for for one good reason, really. But again, you have people losing children, you have people dying young, and you feel like you got to do something, and medicine ain't there yet. So, what else do you do? You got to do something, I suppose. And so these folks that studied like animal magnetism and things like that really kind of believed, that it was coming out of science, and they were like, well, we're finding this, and there wasn't a lot of medicine that they were shunning that was that wasn't, like leeches and stuff like that. Sure, in some cases, and definitely when I was doing it, we were shunning all kinds of medicine that could have made things a little easier. But back when it was in its heyday, um, I think it wasn't a coming from a scam or a manipulation. It was a sincere attempt to alleviate suffering.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to work.
Uh, when you when you're losing hope, or you've got little hope, hope is a pretty big motivator. Um, so it's understandable why people would try these things.
Yeah. It, and like I say, they sort of had an intellectual that they weren't getting, I mean,
Yeah,
before, it was like, we're well-read people. We like the latest thing. And it was certainly a lot of your best thinkers were tackling this. And, um, it had that element of, maybe this is the next level of religion is, thinking on your own and not just, reciting, scripture and singing hymns and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, evolution does not evolution. Religion does kind of evolve in that sense. If when you watch it, it's more and more people trying to break away from the actual organized religion and trying to bring their own search into it. Because you had in the old days, that's kind of what like Sufism was, or
Yeah.
still is today. The Catholic Protestant split kind of happened for something similar to that. You
Yep.
know, people wanting to get their own reading out of the Bible, not wanting to be told what the Bible said.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
people having access to God,
yeah,
firsthand, and I think that was attractive for a lot of folks. And um, but again, not done out of a scam, and not done out of what people think of faith healing is today. But definitely born out of trying to make people get better.
yeah. And I mean, you sort of see a very similar thinking just about religion in general when it comes to a lot of atheists today. They'll say, like, religion is the first lie ever told. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Religion was made up to control power. But when you actually look into religion as a whole, not just like, say, Christianity or Mormonism or Islam or something, you'll see that much of it was born out of, a genuine attempt to find purpose and meaning. They
Yeah.
genuinely believed what they were arguing. It wasn't all snake oil. But today, I think a lot of atheists forget that. They just see it through that lens of religion as a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of the things we are told, I suppose, are going to end up lies.
Yeah.
You know.
Or falsehoods is a better word.
Yeah. 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 Right. Because they don't necessarily have the intent of deceiving. And I think that's the other thing too is if religion was all nothing but lies, it wouldn't be here. The fact that it's false, perhaps. And again, that's such a thing too, because it's like saying science is true or science is false. No,
Yeah.
it's neither.
It's not capable of being those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and people just spending their life trying to search for meaning or search for enlightenment, whether they find it or not, that journey is probably very worthwhile.
Yeah. You'll at,
And
you'd at least learn some new things about yourself.
yeah, 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 or give yourself tools to be a better person. And
Yeah.
if a commandment helps you behave better, then super. Why is that a bad thing? And
Yeah.
some people don't need it, some people do need it. It's different things for different people. And Um, and again, that's something science shouldn't be expected um, to provide us with.
Yeah.
Then after he does that, then he starts talking about kind of some more science fictiony type stuff. And there's a fellow that was on Twitter and had mentioned, and he was reading this book as well. So shout out to that guy. Um, and chapter 3, he was like, it seemed kind of science fictiony to me, and I was like, yeah, I get that. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, it probably needs to be. And it deals with the abolition of man, the post-human humanity, and like
Transhumanism.
transhumanism. Yeah, and I don't meet a lot of folks walking around here in Tennessee that believe in any of that or even know what any of that is. Um, but uh, post-humanism is sort of definitely an element of science fiction, and it got me to thinking. You know, the idea that people have been pushing back on science, that's been happening for 70 years in science fiction by
Yeah.
people predominantly who are atheists for
Yeah.
a whole lot of reasons, social reasons, technical reasons. There's a lot of people, that are saying, tap the brakes. This train ain't always in the right direction. And it's
Yeah.
not just Christians or religion. And a lot of them, treat science like the silliness that it is, I suppose. And I think, the idea that pushback on science is something that's just strictly a religion versus science thing. Or as like you said, horror movies as well too.
Yeah.
Pushback on scientific progress and again, not science, but the people using
The
it.
human use of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the abolition of man, I mean, that sounds horrible, but basically I think their idea behind all of this was that, look, evolution takes too long. So to get us to the next level, we're going to have to, turn it up to 11 here and tweak the secret sauce and drink
We're going to
some
have to
Red
use a
Bull.
different kind of eugenics.
Yeah, yeah, and put it Mountain Dew and everything. And essentially what will come out of that is no longer human.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, what use will that group have with humans?
Yeah.
Is it going to be good?
Well, it's you were mentioning as we were chatting before we actually started recording, you mentioned the girl with all the gifts.
Yeah.
And in that, there's a next stage of evolution brought about by some fungus, and that turns them into cannibalistic zombies. But not always. It's when they
Not,
get
not
near other humans.
cannibalistic, and they never attack themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Yeah. But yeah, I suppose that's a good way to show that they're not cannibalistic because they're not eating themselves; they're just eating the humans. So it shows that they are a next step in evolution.
Yeah.
And they have a very similar thing. Like there's the meeting where I think they were in like a shopping mall. And she holds back all the little kids from attacking, and they're like, well, why should we care that we attack them? They're only humans. We are the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't a good or an evil or, what's the Matheson book? I Am Legend. Sort
Yeah.
of kind of looks at that as well too, where you find out that the hero is actually the villain.
Yeah,
And
he's the guy that created them all. Yeah.
yeah, and what's coming down the pike, especially if there's some sort of like I say, playing with the secret sauce, uh it doesn't necessarily bode well for the folks that are here.
Yeah.
It's so again, I mean, and he wraps up this chapter, going through all of that and transhumanism and it's saying it's never, it's not going to happen. And the worst case scenario is if there are post-humans, that there'll be a parody of what we have today.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, I don't want to give the impression that he's worried that, zombies or whatever are in our future. But the idea that, evolving man, beyond what's already happening is some sort of wonderful elevation, maybe, but maybe not.
But maybe not. Yeah, it could be our downfall. Like people are worried that AI is going to be our downfall, but I think he mentions in the book it's most likely to be posthumans that'll be our downfall rather than an AI model.
Yeah. And, and again, he mentions Trotsky, and talks about Karl Marx a lot. And I think in the next chapter, he will be talking more about the government element of atheism. But he had a kind of quote here that, in case people don't know what transhumanists are, they believe human beings are essentially sparks of consciousness which can escape mortality by detaching themselves from the decaying flesh in which they happen to be embodied. So basically, folks, and I guess there's folks out there that believe this is a thing, that if we preserve the brain, I suppose that's all like the cybergenic stuff, right? Or what do they call that?
Cryogenics.
Cryogenics, yeah. And you if as long as the consciousness never dies, it can be transplanted into another host. And again, you see this all over science fiction and horror.
Lawnmower Man.
Yeah, where the consciousness or people evolve into that consciousness, and then all at the end is you have a weird movie.
Yeah, one that Stephen King takes his name off of.
No, you should, because have you ever read that short story?
Yeah, it's not the same as the film in any way, shape, or form.
No, none whatsoever. But so again, the idea that people are pushing back on science and again, not knowledge or not the fact that there are good things to do, but just turning it over to absolute reverence is very problematic as well. And it doesn't, it's an assertion that no one's asked to prove or demonstrate that it's true. And the asking religious folk for evidence, but then saying the same things about science and not being able to provide them is kind of a silly position to take as well.
It is. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that you have a certain amount of faith in various different things.
Mm-hmm. And I think we do, and I kind of believe that changing our beliefs and changing the way we think is very hard to do, and it takes a lot of determination and probably time. And the idea that we're these evidence weighing scales and then decide with the best evidence we'll automatically believe that, and it's like, no, you're gonna believe what you're predisposed. I was thinking about kind of an example the other day, is if a person came to me and said, random guy every Wednesday goes to the library and reads books to orphans, I'd say, okay. Now, if you said to me, Donald Trump on every Wednesday goes to a library and reads to orphans, I would be like, oh, I would need to see a video of that. And then if you
Yeah.
showed me a video of that, I would say, prove to me it's not doctrine. And
Yeah.
then I would say, can this guy even read? And I wouldn't believe it. I mean, until um, it was actually, if I was standing right there in the midst of it, I'd still probably be like, I don't understand how this isn't happening. It's not happening. This chucklefuck can't read.
Yeah.
And, this is all staged. Now, on the flip side, if you said Jimmy Carter goes to the library every Wednesday and reads to orphans, I would not only believe it, I would say, of course he does.
Yeah.
You know, I know that he writes books. I know he can read. I know he's compassionate towards children and education. But I mean, maybe he's never done it. But I would almost like to be shown that he hasn't. So
Yeah.
I think when you have those things, um, and you could just feel like I say, the idea for me of Donald Trump reading to orphans, like if someone said that to me, the level of evidence would be ridiculous that they would have to provide me before I would say, okay, that's happening.
Yeah.
I would question and I don't think in a skeptical way. It would be driven by my biases and my experiences, not by my skeptical nature. And I
Yeah.
would be and I would be entirely like, if someone told me that one time about Jimmy Carter, I would take that as if it was, the absolute gospel truth.
Yeah.
I would not require any sort of verification. I would not require any sort of um, uh, confirmation. And then if you told me it was false, I'd probably sit there and say, oh, he probably has done it though. I mean, I
Yeah.
would be inclined to do that. And I think that's the way I certainly am. And I know I'm not everybody, but at the same time, I think there's a denial, understanding, belief in how rigid it really probably is.
Yeah. There definitely is from a lot in the skeptic community. And what you're describing there is the way most humans do work. We have a whole bunch of background information about various different things. And when we're introduced to new evidence, it first has to find a way to align with everything that we already believe.
Hmm.
And how well it aligns with what we already believe is how easily we will accept it. It's like, have you heard philosophy people on Twitter talking about prior probabilities and background probabilities and all that kind of stuff? That's basically what it's describing. So the probability of some event happening is, you see it as likely as everything else that's in your background repertoire, and even sometimes stuff you don't have access to because it's just in your unconscious. Um, and I think that's another way that the arguments in this book are useful, because knowing that there are certain things that we just accept unquestioned and take on faith because it's coming from somebody who also has similar background knowledge, and we trust them and all that kind of stuff. Those are the problematic beliefs that we accept on faith. And I know a lot of people accept that kind of stuff when it comes to science, but they just don't admit to it. Um, and another thing about beliefs is that, going back to what you were saying about evidence, not changing your mind, the quality of evidence has to overcome the background priors, but we're more likely to be changed by a charismatic person arguing for something than we are by the evidence. A bland person with all the right evidence is less likely to be believed than a charismatic person with all faulty evidence.
Yeah, yeah, and there again, I think embrace and understand what your makeup is.
Yeah,
And don't pretend to be this beacon of rational and logic and reason, and say things like I no longer have beliefs, and
yeah,
yeah, you do. Just
yeah.
you should understand that you do.
And the fact that they're denying that they have beliefs means that it will be harder to actually change their mind because they believe everything they have is knowledge rather than
Right.
beliefs. And once you got knowledge, if it wasn't right, it wouldn't be knowledge. So everything they think, because they don't have beliefs, only knowledge, then everything they think must be correct because it's all
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, and that ties back into the first part of the book, where again, very intelligent people were very racist because they thought they used logic and reason to get to that point.
Yeah,
So it gave them an enhanced feeling of superiority, which also fueled that. And we're still dealing with systematic racism in hospitals, and it's in the stems and everything that happened 100 years ago.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's the chapter covered mostly.
Yeah,
Is there anything else you wanted to bring up about it?
yeah, transhumanism is some weird shit. And if
It is.
if and if I mean, I guess I thought, like, okay, this is stuff you see in movies and stuff, and I think there's people that believe that. I guess, like you say, this cryogenics and stuff like that. But um, yeah, yeah, I can understand a person saying, well, okay, um, maybe that's going to happen, but it's necessarily just movement; it's not progress.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, he does mention one other thing, a way to show that it's not progress is that if there suddenly were a bunch of people with these new superhuman abilities, they would make themselves like gods, and they wouldn't find peace, they would find war because
Yeah,
each one wants to be the most superior god.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the other kind of fallacy about blaming all the wars on religions. Those wars were going to happen, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we're gonna war, and um, we're not looking for religion to do that. Sometimes it's a fun flag to carry and all that kind of stuff, but it was going to happen. And
yeah.
throughout our
R-
history, it's always been there.
Religion might make it easier to convince people to die for the cause or
Yes.
convince people that the cause is good or rally people around one uniting factor, but religion isn't necessarily something that's needed for that. If you think about say the Vietnam War, that was patriotism and fighting communism and protecting capitalism that kind of unified. They did all the same work that religion did in something like that.
Well, I'll leave you with this, Dave. That without religion, we would have never blown up the Death Star.
Yes, exactly. Those band of rebels driven by their belief in God, or well,
Their religious
belief in the
zeal.
Force. Yeah, the religious zeal, fighting those good imperial people who only wanted to bring science and technology, and
All
then
of them
older,
delusional.
purer. Yeah. Okay, so shall we wrap it up here?
I think so.
Nice one. And I'm looking forward to the next section.
I am too.
Um, yeah, you said it was the political section.
Yeah. So we get to talk about Nazis and Nazi atheists, which will be fun.
Yeah, That'll be very much fun and probably get us banned from YouTube, but you know, they can't stop this. Or it'll bring all the wrong people to our channel.
That's
But
right.
there's a block button.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll catch you next week here.
Thanks for
And
watching.
yeah, cheers for watching. And I'll see you soon, Rev.
Yep, you take care, man.
Take care, mate.